At 71, the tragedy of Oprah Winfrey is beyond heartbreaking. She was the girl in potato sack dresses who learned to read the Bible before age 3, and the woman who would go on to read the soul of a nation. Oprah Winfrey did not just host a talk show. She built a sanctuary where shame was spoken aloud and alchemized into strength. From a shotgun house in Mississippi to a studio that felt like church, she turned wounds into wisdom and gave millions the strange relief of feeling seen. But the crown was cut from thorns. The child shuttled between homes carried secrets that would break most adults. At 14, a son born and lost. In her 20s, the door that cracked open at a local newsroom slammed just as fast, too emotional. They said until emotion became the very engine that changed television forever. The ratings wars crowned her queen. The tabloids made her body a battlefield. She rallied, founded Harpo, minted stars, and still bet everything on art that mattered, then watched beloved sink at the box office while plastic horror triumphed. She smiled for cameras and drove home in silence. Age did not spare her. Knees rebuilt. Miles walked. A lifetime of public judgment about weight answered with uncommon candor. Even medication, named plainly, no miracle offered. And then the losses no empire can insure against: a brother, a sister, a mother, a father. Grief redrew the map of her days. Yet she kept showing up where it counted: scholarships for young men who call themselves Oprahs, a leadership academy for girls who needed a door, a fund for Maui when fire took nearly everything, conversations that still tilt culture when the world seems unlistenable. At 71, the myth is bright, the woman is braver. This is not the story of perfection, it's a ledger of scars carried with grace, of a life that keeps asking the hardest question: how do you hold everyone else's pain without losing yourself? The answer begins where the lights go dark and the truth steps forward. But before the empire, there was a little girl and a farm and a hunger that would not die. Before the book club crowns and the car giveaway screams, before "you get a car" and became a shorthand for joy, there was a cadence, warm, steady, unmistakable, that turned daytime television into something new. Oprah Winfrey didn't just ask questions, she granted permission. In a culture allergic to vulnerability, she made confession feel like oxygen and turned the living room into a sanctuary where shame lost its teeth. The camera adored her, yes, but more crucially, ordinary people trusted her. That trust is the spine of her legend. She arrived at a fault line in American life. The 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds were an age of daytime gladiators, chair throwing, ambush reveals, and freak show theatrics that baited the darkest corners of curiosity. Oprah stood in the same arena and refused the blood sport. She met spectacle with empathy, replacing humiliation with testimony. Ratings followed, but something rarer did too: relief. A nation simmering with unspoken grief about abuse, addiction, body image, identity. Faith finally had a place to lay it down without being mocked. People want to be validated, she would say. Everybody wants to be seen and heard. That simple sentence, part diagnosis, part manifesto, rearranged the genre. Yet there was always a counterpoint. The woman who invited the world to open up often closed the door on her own exhaustion. After shows about trauma, she'd sit in the hush of the dressing room, foundations smudged by tears that weren't camera-ready, asking the question every healer learns to fear: how much of me is left to give? Even triumph had splinters. A body second-guessed by strangers. A voice called too emotional until emotion became a signature. A historic run crowned by an ambitious network launch that nearly collapsed under the weight of her name. To be Oprah is to bear paradox. Soft and steel, altar and marketplace, intimacy and empire. The empire mattered. Harpo Productions flipped the PowerScript host to owner, talent to studio chief. It launched careers, shepherded films, and proved that the most profitable currency in media might be trust. But trust is expensive. To keep faith with her audience, she said the unsayable first. About childhood wounds, about failure, about weight and the stubborn ache of self-judgment. It wasn't branding, it was moral architecture. Turn your wounds into wisdom, she advised, not as slogan, but as survival technique learned in the fire. Culturally, she became a hinge swinging between America's appetite for uplift and its addiction to spectacle, between the self-help boom and the old catechisms of community and service. The book club democratized literary prestige. The Favorite Things episodes democratized delight. The philanthropic engine scholarships at Morehouse, a leadership academy for girls translated sentiment into structure. And when calamity hit, from individual heartbreaks to wildfires devouring Maui's nights, the response was direct, almost defiant. Get the help to the people. There are lesser-known seams in this tapestry. In the early Chicago years, a young Roger Ebert, more friend than flame, suggested syndication over dinner, a quiet nudge that detonated into destiny. Years later, at the other end of the arc, knee surgeries threatened to evict her from her own life. She rebuilt herself by walking, mile upon mile, a private pilgrimage disguised as exercise. And in 2023, she refused the pageant of perfection and admitted she'd turned to medication in her long war with weight, an unfashionable truth told anyway. Honesty is the only audience guarantee she ever believed in. To understand Oprah at 71 is to understand scale without spectacle. The homes are sanctuaries, the jet is autonomy, the bank account is a tool. The center remains unchanged. Witness, name the pain, hand the microphone to someone who's never had one, then listen like it's prayer. She is both the myth and the mechanic building and repairing the machine of empathy in a noisy world. But myths begin somewhere humbler than syndication deals and magazine covers. They begin with a child in a wooden pew, reciting scripture with a voice too big for her body, learning that words can save you when no one else will. Before there was a queen of television, there was a little girl on a farm, hungry, brilliant, and already bracing against the wind. The wind is rising. The past is ready to speak. The story of Oprah Winfrey begins far from the bright lights that would one day bear her name. It begins on a patch of dusty Mississippi soil, in a wooden farmhouse without plumbing or certainty, where a child's laughter echoed between fields of struggle. She was born Oprah Gail Winfrey on the 29th of January 1954 in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, a name as tangled as her beginnings. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was a teenage maid. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, a barber and part-time coal miner. They never married and barely remained in the same frame of her life. From the moment she entered the world, the forces that would define her poverty, displacement, and resilience were already in motion. When Oprah was still an infant, she was sent to live with her grandmother, Hattie Mae Lee, a woman of unbending faith and iron will. The world she entered was severe. Long days of chores, nights of silence, and Sunday mornings filled with hymns rising from a small wooden church. Yet within that stern landscape, her grandmother gave her the most priceless inheritance of all words. "I learned to read the Bible before I was 3 years old," Oprah later said, her voice trembling with the memory. By 3, she could recite scripture to the congregation. Her small frame would stand before the church, barefoot, eyes shining, declaring passages from the book of Job and Psalms, unaware that she was already rehearsing for the world's grandest stage. That voice, pure, tremulous, commanding, was her first weapon against despair. Reading became her refuge, language her armor. While other children played, she devoured verses and stories, whispering them aloud as if they could build a world safer than the one she knew. But the world was not kind to poor black girls in mid-century Mississippi. Oprah wore potato sacks as dresses, mocked by other children for her rags. She remembered that humiliation not as a wound but as a warning. Dignity must live within you, or it will not live at all. When she was 6, her life shifted again. Her mother, Vernita, who had moved north to Milwaukee for work, sent for her. What awaited was not comfort, but chaos. Vernita worked endless hours as a maid. Oprah was passed between caretakers, left in rooms filled with strangers and whispers. In the hollows of that neglect, darker shadows crept in. Between the ages of 9 and 14, she suffered sexual abuse at the hands of men she trusted, relatives, family friends, her mother's companion. She did not tell anyone. "I grew up never feeling wanted, never feeling safe." She would later confess on national television, her voice steady but the pain still visible behind her eyes. These were not merely childhood tragedies, they were defining crucibles. Each violation carved a scar that would later become her empathy. Each betrayal a lesson in how the powerless are silenced. But for years, she carried it all in silence, too ashamed to speak, too frightened to ask for help. By 14, the storm reached its cruelest point. Oprah became pregnant, and the baby boy died shortly after birth. The grief was unbearable, and so was the shame. In the world around her, there was little compassion for a young black girl whose innocence had been stolen. "That was my first real experience with death and with guilt," she said. "It changed everything about me." Her mother, unable to handle her rebellion and pain, sent her away to Nashville to live with her father, Vernon. It was the one decision that saved her life. Vernon Winfrey was strict, hard, but fair. He believed in structure, curfews, and education as the only escape from the chaos that had devoured so many. "As long as you live in my house," he told her, "you will read a book every week." And she did. He made her write reports on each one, drilled discipline into her as if it were oxygen. Under his roof, Oprah found stability for the first time. The fear that had shaped her childhood began to give way to purpose. She excelled in school, joining speech clubs, earning debate trophies, and charming teachers with her quick wit and electric curiosity. Her pain, though never gone, became the fuel behind her drive to be seen, to matter, to transform shame into significance. It was also in Nashville that she discovered the first flicker of her calling. Standing in front of a classroom, reading aloud, she felt the same stillness she once felt in church as a little girl reciting the Bible. It was power, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that holds them. She realized that her voice, when used with honesty, could move hearts. Years later, when she looked back on those years, she said something that crystallized her philosophy. "Turn your wounds into wisdom." That was not a metaphor. It was an instruction manual for survival. The child who had once lived between worlds, between parents, between homes, between safety and fear, learned to build her own world out of language. The pain became a compass pointing her toward empathy. The loneliness became the root of her connection to millions. By 17, she had already transformed that inner fire into ambition. She entered the Miss Black Tennessee beauty pageant not for glamour, but for a chance to be seen. She won. The crown was made of rhinestones, but for her, it was gold. A symbol that the world might finally be ready to listen. That single victory opened the door to radio, to her first on-air job at WVOL in Nashville, and to a destiny still waiting beyond the horizon. But the past never disappears. It waits, quietly, inside the successes of the future. For Oprah, the next chapter would test whether that same resilience could withstand the glare of cameras, deadlines, and public doubt. The girl who once wore rags was about to step into a studio, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The radio station was small, the microphone old, and the salary barely enough to fill her stomach. But when one 7-year-old Oprah Winfrey sat down before that microphone at WVOL Radio in Nashville, something ancient stirred. "The very first time I spoke into that mic," she would later say, "I knew I was home." She wasn't reading the news. She was reading herself into existence. Every syllable was an act of defiance against the silence that had once defined her childhood. For the first time, people leaned in to listen, and she realized that when she spoke truthfully, they stayed. Still, her early path was anything but glamorous. She arrived to work in borrowed dresses, sometimes hungry, sometimes late from long bus rides through Tennessee rain. The glamour of media belonged to someone else's world. Oprah was just renting her way into it with courage and exhaustion. By 19, she had already broken a barrier that no one like her had dared cross, becoming the youngest news anchor and the first black female anchor at WLAC-TV in Nashville. But the studio's cold lights were unkind. Her co-anchors smirked, her tone was called too emotional, and her natural empathy, the very quality that would later make her a legend, was dismissed as unprofessional. The newsroom was a cage of expectations. She was told to keep her hair straighter, her diction wider, her emotions smaller. For every broadcast, she learned to mask herself. Yet the mask never fit. "I would cry after stories," she admitted, "because I couldn't separate myself from the people I was reporting on." That tenderness, the same thing her bosses saw as weakness, was already her magic. After Nashville came Baltimore and a position at WJZ-TV. The promotion should have been triumph, but it was another crucible. She co-anchored the evening news and was quietly dismissed months later. The management said her delivery lacked authority. It was their polite way of saying she was too human for the script. Then came what felt like exile, a move to a struggling local morning show called People Are Talking. It was 1,978. The show's format was loose, the audience small, the expectations lower than her confidence. And yet, in that accidental demotion, Oprah finally found the soil she was meant to grow in. She didn't perform for the camera. She conversed with it. She didn't interrogate guests. She connected with them. Her empathy broke the glass between stage and audience. Tears, laughter, awkward silences, she allowed them all. Baltimore had never seen anything like her. Neither had daytime television. Within months, People Are Talking began to climb in ratings. For the first time, she felt something like recognition, but also something more dangerous. Possibility. The idea that she could own a voice that no one could take away. She worked tirelessly, often staying late to rewatch tapes of her own shows, studying every gesture, every breath, learning how to turn instinct into craft. But success didn't erase the ghosts of insecurity. She still arrived home to loneliness, still wrestled with body image, still feared being discovered as the poor girl from Mississippi pretending to belong. She once said she kept her refrigerator so empty she'd cry at the sight of it. Her career was rising, but inside, she was still hungry in every sense of the word. After 8 years in Baltimore, fate called from Chicago. A struggling show named AM Chicago needed a new host. Its ratings were abysmal, its future non-existent. Most saw the offer as professional suicide. Oprah saw a dare. I thought, if I fail, she later recalled, I'll fail on my own terms. When she arrived at the station in 1984, she was greeted by wary producers and a thin audience. She walked onto the set in a thrift store dress, looked into the lens, and did what she'd always done best: she listened. She listened to her guests as if their words were sacred texts, and she listened to the silence between questions as if it were the heartbeat of truth. By the end of that year, AM Chicago wasn't just surviving, it was number one, overtaking Phil Donahue's long reign as the king of daytime talk. The network executives were stunned. The country had found something it didn't know it was missing: authenticity. It was a revolution disguised as conversation. Where others sought sensationalism, Oprah sought connection. Where others chased laughter, she pursued understanding. And where most shows ended in applause, hers ended in reflection. Her empathy became a national current. Audiences wrote letters saying, "When she cries, I feel I can cry too." Viewers weren't tuning in for gossip, they were tuning in for grace. In an era that celebrated detachment, Oprah made feeling a kind of power. Then came 1986, the year everything changed. The show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show, and syndication catapulted it into the homes of tens of millions. Chicago had birthed a phenomenon. Behind the scenes, however, Oprah's ascent came with a price. The workload was punishing, the scrutiny merciless. She faced racism from executives who doubted a black woman could anchor the moral center of daytime television. She endured tabloid cruelty about her weight, her relationships, her worth. Yet she never retaliated with bitterness. She turned the pain inward and alchemized it into empathy for her audience. The child who had once been unseen was now a mirror for the unseen everywhere. Each episode became a sermon of survival, though she never used the word. Her childhood of neglect became the subtext behind every comforting glance she offered a guest. Her teenage years of humiliation became the hidden pulse behind every question about shame and resilience. In a business built on image, Oprah built something radical: intimacy. And intimacy in the mass media era was gold. By her early 30s, she was no longer just a television host, she was a movement. Her name alone carried a strange electricity. It could make books sell, movies soar, or public figures tremble. But all legends are forged in heat, and fame has its own quiet cruelties. The next chapter of her story would bring both triumph beyond imagination and a weight that few could carry without breaking. The girl who had once whispered verses in a Mississippi church was about to speak to the world and discover that not even global adoration could silence the old ache inside her. When the Oprah Winfrey Show went national in 1986, America didn't just get a new talk show, it got a new language for emotion. The moment that logo appeared on screen, daytime television transformed. What had once been casual entertainment became confession, revelation, and redemption, all unfolding in front of millions. The girl who had once recited Bible verses in a wooden church now stood beneath spotlights, commanding the attention of the world. But instead of preaching, she listened. Every episode was a sermon without scripture, built on one belief: truth heals, and she gave the world permission to speak it. For the next 25 seasons, The Oprah Winfrey Show became the most watched daytime talk show in history. She interviewed presidents and prisoners, royalty and runaways, icons and ordinary people. Her guests came seeking visibility, and in her presence, they found absolution. There were unforgettable moments that seemed to pause time itself. The day she wheeled out wagons of fat to symbolize her weight loss, later admitting it became an image she regretted. The moment she handed every member of her audience the keys to a new car, shouting, "You get a car! You get a car! Everybody gets a car!" A clip that still vibrates through pop culture. The day she publicly forgave those who had hurt her, turning private trauma into collective catharsis. She created something more potent than television. She created ritual. For millions, tuning into Oprah was not habit, it was therapy. Housewives, students, and workers across continents timed their afternoons by her presence. The show became a national mirror, and in that reflection, America began to see itself, its wounds, its beauty, its contradictions. Her book club, launched in 1996, turned obscure authors into bestsellers overnight. Toni Morrison, Wally Lamb, Eckhart Tolle, names that soared because Oprah touched them. She didn't just make literature popular, she made introspection fashionable. Reading became rebellion against ignorance, and she was its patron saint. But fame of that magnitude is both blessing and burden. The applause outside the studio was deafening. The silence after the cameras stopped was suffocating. She was a billionaire, an icon, and yet often alone. "People think I'm surrounded by friends," she once admitted, "but most days I go home to silence." Behind the confident laughter was a woman forever aware of her fragility. Every episode required her to hold the pain of others, to absorb it, process it, and transform it into hope. The emotional toll was invisible but immense. Her producers described days when she'd retreat to her dressing room, collapse on the couch, and weep quietly. Her makeup streaked, her chest still heavy from the stories she just carried on air. She called it the weight of empathy. The arflantan of brains and blang, the arflantalos and propered in the bayad. And while the world adored her, critics lurked in every corner. Journalists accused her of turning grief into spectacle, of commercializing pain, of selling spirituality like a product. They mocked her sincerity as performance, her generosity as branding. The same transparency that built her empire became the blade used against her. Tabloids stalked her relentlessly, her weight fluctuations splashed across covers, her friendships dissected, her relationship with Stedman Graham doubted, her loyalty to Gayle King gossiped about. "There were days," she said, "when I wondered if I could keep carrying this weight." But she didn't crumble. She reinvented. In 1988, she founded Harpo Productions, her name spelled backward, a deliberate symbol of reflection and reclamation. It was more than a studio. It was a revolution in ownership. At a time when television hosts were mere faces of corporate networks, Oprah became her own boss. She didn't just sit in front of the camera, she owned the camera, the lights, the rights, and the legacy. From Harpo's sound stages in Chicago came not only the Oprah Winfrey Show, but also new stars. Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Rachel Ray, Nate Berkus, each an offshoot of the Oprah tree, carrying her brand of trust into homes everywhere. Harpo's success made her the first black female billionaire in history, a self-made empire that stood as proof that empathy could be profitable without losing its soul. Yet she never allowed the billions to define her. "Money is a tool," she said. "It's not my identity." Still, the higher she rose, the more the world demanded. After 2 decades at the top, she tried to step beyond television, taking a leap into film with Beloved, 1998, her passion project based on Toni Morrison's novel. It was meant to be her masterpiece, her offering to Black history, a cinematic requiem for slavery's ghosts. She poured her fortune and her soul into it. But when it premiered, Beloved was crushed at the box office, overshadowed by Bride of Chucky, a horror film about a murderous doll. The failure gutted her. For weeks, she stayed out of the public eye. "I felt humiliated," she confessed later. "I had poured everything I had into something sacred, and no one came." It was her first major defeat in decades, and it left her questioning whether her destiny had outgrown her audience. Yet even that failure became alchemy. From it, she learned that legacy isn't measured in ticket sales, but in intention. Sometimes, she reflected, you win by losing. Through it all, her relationship with Stedman remained her quiet anchor. While tabloids demanded a wedding, Oprah resisted the institution entirely. "I didn't want a husband," she said. "I wanted a life." It was a declaration of independence disguised as love, a partnership sustained not by ceremony, but by respect. In the early 2000s, as reality TV erupted into chaos and exploitation, Oprah's show evolved again. She focused on spiritual awakening, introducing authors like Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle, steering the national conversation toward mindfulness and self-mastery. Some mocked her as a guru of feelings. Others recognized that she was simply evolving ahead of the culture. By the time the Oprah Winfrey Show ended in 2011, it had aired over 4,500 episodes, reached 150 countries, and changed the DNA of television itself. Its final episode drew nearly 17 million viewers, ending with the same kind of intimacy it began with: a woman, a chair, a story, and a truth. She looked into the camera and said, "You have been my life's work." And then she smiled, a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion that only comes when you've carried the world and somehow survived the weight. Her reign as the queen of daytime television had ended, but her dominion over American culture had only deepened. She was no longer just a talk show host. She was an institution, a symbol, a verb. The climb was over, but the descent, the slow, quiet confrontation with loss, failure, and mortality was only beginning. The brightest crowns, after all, cast the darkest shadows. When the applause faded in 2011 and the curtain closed on the Oprah Winfrey Show, America stood still. The Queen had abdicated, but not for defeat, at least not yet. She stepped away at the height of her reign, confident that her next empire, the Oprah Winfrey Network, OON, would carry the torch of her philosophy into a new era. But even legends learn that the world changes faster than faith. OWN launched in 2011 with headlines promising rebirth. Instead, it delivered humiliation. The ratings were dismal. Critics pounced. The New York Times called it a network adrift. Viewers who once cried with Oprah on weekday afternoons now clicked elsewhere, to reality shows, to the internet, to the algorithmic chaos of YouTube. The woman who had once dictated the nation's emotional temperature suddenly found herself silenced in the noise. For the first time in decades, Oprah Winfrey tasted failure on a public stage she herself had built. She later admitted, "The first year of OWN was the hardest time of my life. I thought I'd made the biggest mistake." The financial losses climbed toward the tens of millions. The loneliness returned, the kind that sits in the chest like a stone. Behind her radiant confidence, she whispered to friends, "I forgot who I was." It wasn't the first time the crown had cracked. Years earlier, the collapse of Beloved had already taught her that artistic ambition can break even billionaires. The memory of empty theaters haunted her. Beloved had been her soul's confession, a film made not for profit but for truth, and the world had turned away. To fail once as an artist was painful. To fail again as a mogul felt like destiny mocking her. She retreated into silence. "I stopped talking," she told Fortune later. "I started listening again." And slowly, she rebuilt. Her network pivoted toward authenticity: documentaries, inspirational interviews, shows rooted in healing rather than spectacle. OWN stabilized, then flourished. But Oprah herself never forgot how close she had come to breaking. The wounds weren't only professional. For decades, she had fought a war with her own body, one fought in the cruelest of arenas: public opinion. Every fluctuation in her weight became tabloid fodder. Every photo was circled in red ink, dissected as if her body were national property. She laughed on air, pulling wagons of fat to symbolize victory, but later called it the biggest embarrassment of my career. The gesture meant triumph. The memory felt like exposure. Behind the laughter, the truth was far darker. "My body," she confessed, "became the battlefield for every unhealed part of me." She cycled through diets, personal trainers, and silent guilt. And as the decades passed, her knees paid the price. Decades of strain and expectation condensed into pain so intense she could barely walk. By 2021, both knees had failed her. "I felt trapped in my own body," she admitted. "I had carried everyone else's burdens, and now I couldn't carry myself." The surgeries came, brutal and humbling. For weeks, she could not walk unaided. For a woman whose power had always been presence, motion, voice, command, immobility felt like erasure. But recovery, as always, became her rebellion. She began walking again, inch by inch, through the pain, turning each step into ritual. 5 miles a day, 10-mile climbs on weekends. Every step, she said, was a prayer of gratitude that I still could. And then came another confession, one that reignited debate worldwide. In 2023, Oprah revealed that she had turned to weight loss medication, not as a miracle, but as surrender. "I was tired of being shamed," she said, "tired of pretending." The honesty was shocking, even for her. Fans called it brave, critics called it hypocrisy. She didn't argue either way. "This isn't pride," she said quietly. "It's survival." But the battles of the body were only echoes of deeper grief. Oprah's true tragedies lived not in studios or headlines, but in the funerals she quietly attended far from cameras. Her brother Jeffrey died in 1989 of AIDS at just 30 years old, in an era when compassion was scarce and stigma was suffocating. "He died in shame," Oprah said softly years later, "not because of who he was, but because of what the world refused to understand." She carried that guilt like a private shadow. Then, in 2003, her half-sister Patricia succumbed to addiction, a slow-motion tragedy that had unfolded over years. Oprah mourned her, not just for dying, but for never getting the chance to be whole. "Addiction," she once said, "doesn't just destroy the person using it, destroys everyone who loves them." In 2010, an impossible twist of fate offered a bittersweet miracle. Oprah discovered she had another half-sister, Patricia Lofton, given up for adoption decades earlier without her knowledge. The reunion was beautiful, but it hurt. "It was like finding the missing half of a photograph," Oprah said, and realizing how many birthdays, hugs, and I love yous were lost in that tear. Her mother, Vernita Lee, passed in 2018. Their bond had always been fractured, built more from duty than tenderness. When Vernita died, Oprah said she felt a grief mixed with unfinished forgiveness. She buried her mother quietly, without spectacle, admitting that she had spent her entire life seeking the warmth that woman could never give. 4 years later, in 2022, her father, Vernon Winfrey, the man who had saved her from ruin as a teenager, died at 88. She was by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering gratitude. "He gave me discipline," she said, "and discipline gave me everything." But when he was gone, the anchor was gone too. One by one, her family disappeared. The child who had once known nothing but loneliness was again surrounded by absence. Even her enduring relationship with Stedman Graham, steady, faithful, nearly 4 decades strong, was not immune to melancholy. They had built a life together, without marriage, without children. For Oprah, it was liberation. But in the quiet of her Montecito estate, when the noise of the world recedes, that choice sometimes returns like a whisper. "I would not have been a good mother," she once said, with brutal honesty. Yet she admitted that, "Sometimes I think of the children who never were. Those are the wounds that never heal, the ones that never even fully form, because they live in the imagination." To the world, Oprah Winfrey remains untouchable. The billionaire who conquered television, the philanthropist who rebuilt schools and lives, the woman whose voice still carries the gravity of faith. But in truth, her tragedy is not downfall, it's endurance. The endless cycle of building, breaking, rebuilding. Every crown she wears was once forged from pain. Every smile hides ghosts she simply learned to live with. At 71, Oprah's story is no longer about the rise. It's about the survival of the self, the quiet miracle of still being able to rise at all. Her empire stands tall, yes, but beneath it lies the truth no camera ever captured. Greatness is not freedom. It is the art of carrying the weight without letting it crush you. And in that art, Oprah Winfrey remains unmatched. By the time the world called her the most powerful woman alive, Oprah Winfrey had already begun the quiet rebellion of stepping away, not from purpose, but from noise. Her days of flashing lights and studio applause were behind her. In their place came something simpler, gentler, and perhaps truer: stillness. She moved her center of gravity to Montecito, California, where the Pacific hums at the edges of vast lands she calls the Promised Land. The name isn't metaphorical, it's declaration. 40 acres of oak and sky, fields that whisper of peace she fought half a lifetime to earn. Here, mornings begin not with makeup chairs or scripts, but with horses. She walks the property in soft dawn light, the air crisp, the silence total. Her boots press into the same earth that once bore her ancestors in poverty. Now, it carries her in abundance. "When I step outside," she once said, "I feel gratitude rise from the ground." In 2016, she purchased Seamare Farm, another 23 acres of serenity stables, wells, and a modest home that breathes warmth instead of opulence. These places aren't trophies. They are fortresses against the chaos of fame. "I have everything I need," she told Vogue, "and it's mostly peace." But even in peace, she never stopped moving. Her Harpo Productions evolved into a vast media ecosystem, streaming partnerships with Apple TV+, book deals, documentaries, and her long-running book club, now digital, reaching millions. Each new medium is just another way for her to do what she's always done: listen and connect. In 2023, she returned to the cultural stage with Force, the producer behind The Color Purple's new film adaptation. The symbolism was electric. Nearly 4 decades after her Oscar-nominated performance in the original, she came full circle, now as the architect, not the actor. "It's not nostalgia," she said. "It's legacy." And legacy, for Oprah, is no longer built from television ratings or magazine covers. It's built from impact in people, in education, in empathy. Her Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa remains one of her proudest achievements. Many of the students, once children from townships, are now scholars at Ivy League universities, CEOs, and doctors. "They are my daughters," she says. "The children my heart chose." Is Remember in 60s. Her philanthropy continues to stretch like sunlight over forgotten corners of the world, funding scholarships at Morehouse College, aiding disaster relief in Maui, and investing in mental health programs across the U.S. But she resists the word charity. "It's not giving," she said. "It's returning. I'm returning what was given to me by grace." Yet behind that serenity, time is doing its quiet work. After decades of endurance, the body that carried her through battle now demands gentleness. Her double knee surgeries in 2021 forced her to slow down, to surrender to fragility. "I learned that healing," she confessed, "is also an act of strength. Each morning walk 3 miles before sunrise is part exercise, part meditation. Each step a reminder that even pain, when met with gratitude, becomes holy." And yet, for all the land she owns, for all the accolades and abundance, solitude lingers. Her partner, Stedman Graham, remains her steady companion, a quiet silhouette at the edge of her story. Their relationship, unmarried but unbreakable, is perhaps the truest rebellion of all. They don't need a ceremony. They have time, loyalty, and a mutual understanding that freedom, not ownership, sustains love. But sometimes, late at night, as the Montecito wind rattles the windows and the house settles into silence, she feels the faint ache of what might have been the children never born, the lineage that ends with her. "I wasn't meant to be a mother in the traditional sense," she once said softly, "but I was meant to nurture the world." Today, at 71, Oprah's life is no longer measured in viewers or headlines, but in balance. She reads. She gardens. She hosts small gatherings for the people she calls soul family. The woman who once held a nation's confessions now holds space only for peace. Yet every so often, when the cameras return and she steps back into the light, whether it's an interview with royalty or a conversation about grief, she reminds the world of something rare, that power and tenderness can coexist in one body. She has conquered empires, yes, but the greater triumph is this: she has made peace with herself. When the story of modern America is written, not the headlines, but the heartbeat, it will carry her fingerprints. Oprah Winfrey did not just reflect culture, she rearranged it. She redefined what it meant to speak, to listen, to confess, and to rise. Her legacy cannot be contained in the phrases talk show host or billionaire philanthropist. It's something larger, stranger, an alchemy of faith, storytelling, and emotional intelligence that shifted the architecture of an entire civilization's media. In the 1,980 seconds, she gave television its conscience. In the 1,990 seconds, she gave America its therapy. In the 2000s, she gave spirituality a seat at the table of pop culture. And in the decades since, she has remained the quiet pulse under every modern conversation about self-worth, trauma, and transformation. At her peak, The Oprah Winfrey Show was broadcast to over 140 countries, reaching tens of millions every day. But her impact wasn't measured in audience size, it was measured in permission. She gave people permission to cry in public, to admit their secrets, to name their pain. She turned emotional honesty into a form of courage and made vulnerability fashionable decades before it became an internet hashtag. Every generation of media personalities that followed, Ellen, Brené Brown, Trevor Noah, even the influencers and podcasters who now turn confession into brand, walked through doors she built. The talk show became therapy. The interview became an awakening. The audience became a congregation. And Oprah, intentionally or not, became its high priestess. But her influence transcended television. She built an empire of literacy, turning her book club into one of the most powerful cultural engines in publishing history. An Oprah sticker on a novel's cover could change a writer's life overnight. She didn't just sell books, she democratized access to ideas. Through her, authors like Toni Morrison and Eckhart Tolle reached millions who might never have wandered into their pages otherwise. Her philanthropy deepened that impact into something structural. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa is no vanity project, it's her antidote to the girlhood she never got to have. Every scholarship, every dorm room, every library shelf, there is a form of redemption. Her students call her Mama O, a title that carries both reverence and relief. I built the school I needed when I was a child, she said, and I filled it with the hope I never had. Through decades of giving, she has quietly donated hundreds of millions of dollars, much of it focused on education, women's empowerment, and disaster relief. Yet when asked about generosity, she rejects the word charity. I'm not giving, she says. I'm sharing what life shared with me. Her cultural resonance is strange and enduring. Presidents have called her a unifying figure. Religious leaders cite her as an evangelist of compassion. Psychologists point to her as a catalyst for the mainstream acceptance of mental health conversations. And for many ordinary people, especially women of color, she stands as living proof that one can emerge from trauma not just intact, but incandescent. Still, the mythology around her is not without shadows. Critics accuse her of commodifying spirituality, of oversimplifying suffering, of building an empire out of self-help slogans. She doesn't deny the contradictions. I'm not perfect, she once said. I'm just fully myself. That's all I ever promised. Perhaps that is her truest legacy. Imperfection carried with grace. A life that models resilience without pretending to erase the scars. Her story, rags to riches, trauma to transcendence, is the American dream retold as emotional scripture. In the pantheon of cultural icons, she occupies an unusual place. She is both priest and producer, healer and capitalist, confessor and confided in. Her name is a shorthand for transformation itself. To Oprah, someone means to awaken them. To be Oprah Ed is to be seen. And yet, for all the grandeur, her most enduring impact may lie in the invisible. The quiet decision of a single viewer somewhere in the world to forgive, to try again, to believe that brokenness does not mean the end. That is the strange power of Oprah Winfrey. She built no monuments of marble, but in millions of hearts, she carved a sentence that will outlive every studio and spotlight. You are enough. Every era has its mirror. For nearly half a century, Oprah Winfrey was ours. Her life unfolded like a parable, one that revealed both the brilliance and the burden of what it means to be human in the public eye. Yet when you strip away the applause, the billion-dollar empire, and the gospel of self-help that turned her into a global phenomenon, what remains is something far more elemental. A wounded child who refused to stay silent. That refusal changed the world. It's easy to forget that, before Oprah, television was spectacle without soul. It was news, gossip, distraction. She rewrote its DNA. She spoke with the cadence of a preacher and the empathy of a survivor. When guests broke down on her couch, she didn't look away, she leaned in. And in doing so, she taught millions to lean in too. But there's a shadow that follows every savior. The more she healed others, the less she seemed able to rest herself. There's tragedy in that, the loneliness of the healer, the exhaustion of endless giving. It's the paradox at the heart of her story. The woman who gave everyone else a voice often struggled to quiet the noise inside her own. Her greatness is not her perfection, it's her persistence. Through humiliation, through heartbreak, through public ridicule of her weight and body, she never allowed shame to dictate her story. She turned every failure into vocabulary. She turned pain into programming. She turned isolation into intimacy. Yet the cost of being a symbol is steep. People don't let symbols rest. The public doesn't want to see their saints stumble, even though that's what makes them human. Oprah's life is a long lesson in that contradiction, the price of carrying other people's hope on your shoulders. Still, when history looks back, her ledger is luminous. She used her power to lift others. Young men at Morehouse who call themselves Oprah's sons, girls in South Africa who call her Mama O, families in Maui who call her benefactor. Her legacy isn't just in what she built, but in what she restored dignity to those who thought they had none. Critics say she commercialized compassion. Maybe so, but she also democratized it. She made empathy accessible in a world starving for connection. Even if her brand became a business, her message never lost its core, that healing is possible and that brokenness can still be holy. At 71, her story stands not as a monument of untouchable success, but as a blueprint for resilience. She didn't rise because she was chosen. She rose because she kept choosing again and again to turn the darkness into light. And perhaps that is what makes her tragedy so profound. The world gave her everything: fame, fortune, reverence, and still she walks the hills of Montecito, quietly, childless, reflective, surrounded by silence. Not defeated, not bitter, but aware that even the grandest lives come with unfillable spaces. But those spaces are not voids, they're echoes. They remind us of the people she lost, the pain she endured, the humanity she never surrendered. Oprah Winfrey's life isn't just an American success story, it's a human survival story. And in that survival lies both heartbreak and beauty. Because in the end, the woman who taught the world how to speak has left behind something more powerful than words. Proof that truth, even when it trembles, can still change the world. At dawn in Montecito, the mist drifts across the hills like memory itself. The horses move quietly in their paddocks. Somewhere inside the wide wooden house, Oprah Winfrey is awake, no audience, no applause, just the hum of silence she once prayed for. She brews her tea, opens her journal, and writes. It's not a script anymore. It's gratitude written in ink. The world still calls her a billionaire, a mogul, a living legend. But when she looks out over her land, she sees something simpler, a life reclaimed. The barefoot girl who once wore potato sacks has come full circle back to the soil, back to the stillness, back to the hum of her own breath. Sometimes she walks the gardens alone, pausing beneath the ancient oaks. She presses her palm to their bark as though feeling the pulse of the earth itself. I am still that little girl, she once said, standing in church, believing words can change everything. It's strange the way time softens its edges. The lights that once blinded her now feel distant, like stars fading at sunrise. The empire hums on books, interviews, foundations, schools, but she no longer needs to be everywhere. The work has outlived her presence. There's melancholy in that realization, the bittersweet awareness that the world moves forward, even without its heroes. But there's also peace, because if legacy means anything, it's the freedom to disappear into your own creation. In the quiet hours, she sometimes remembers the voices, the guests who cried, the children she saved, the loved ones she buried, the boy who lived for only a few days, the brother lost to silence, the mother she could never fully forgive. They are all still with her, woven into the air she breathes. Every act of kindness, every tear shed on television, every scholarship given in her name, these are the echoes of those ghosts turned into light. And when she looks at the horizon, where sea meets sky, she knows that her story was never about perfection. It was about persistence, the sacred art of falling and standing again, of holding the pain of millions and still finding enough room in her heart for joy. The cameras no longer roll. The world no longer waits for her words. But maybe that's the point. Maybe her final gift is the silence itself, a reminder that after all the noise, all the fame, all the tragedy, peace is what remains. The sun rises higher, painting gold across the fields. She turns, smiles faintly, and whispers to the wind, as if speaking to every soul that ever needed to hear her voice. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now,